A sinister, deep crimson glow burned on the horizon ahead as the massive silver B-29s flew low over the surface of the Pacific. There would be no difficulty locating the target that night of March 10th, 1945. It was clearly marked for everyone in the formation to see, blazing like a funeral pyre, the flames practically licking the night sky. Far back in the formation, Richard Bale of the 9th Bomb Group, in his superfortress, could almost read a newspaper in the cockpit due to the fires devouring Tokyo below. As he flew over the target and dropped his bombs, he couldn't help but think of the absolute horror taking place beneath him. Often cited as the most destructive bombing in human history, more devastating than the bombing of Dresden, it claimed more lives and caused more urban destruction than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki a few months later. The bombing of Tokyo, also known as Operation Meeting House, was a series of incendiary bombing raids by the United States Army Air Forces during the Pacific campaigns in 1945, months before the deployment of the nuclear bombs. Conservative estimates suggest that the firestorm caused by the incendiary bombs killed at least 80,000 people, and likely more than 100,000 in a single night, with around 1 million people left homeless. The Japanese later called it the Night of Black Snow. This is a story that goes far beyond the simple bombing of a capital. Today we'll understand the details of why it was a much more destructive event than other bombings during World War II. The horror Bale witnessed was the result of months of planning, various failures, a few experiments, and relatively few successes. In the summer of 1944, the United States Marine Corps and Army captured 3 islands in the Mariana Chain: Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands, unlike some other recent conquests, were not just stepping stones toward Tokyo. They held strategic significance and would play a vital role in defeating Japan in the months ahead. The strategic location of the Mariana Islands put Japan within range of the Army Air Force's B-29 Superfortress bombers. These new heavy aircraft had an impressive range of over 5,000 kilometers and a maximum altitude of over 9,000 meters. The B-29s were designed to fly at such high altitudes that most enemy fighters could not reach them, allowing them to drop their bombs with maximum accuracy and effectiveness on targets. In the video description, I'll leave a partial list of B-29 missions between 1944 and 1945. Although B-29s had already been bombing Japan from China since mid-1944, it was only on November 24th when they began operating from the new and massive airfields in the Mariana Islands that the first transoceanic bombing in history took place. It was also the first time a formation of American aircraft had flown over Tokyo since Jimmy Doolittle's raiders in 1942. The November 24th raid, though heavily publicized, caused little damage. Incredibly strong winds and thick clouds limited the attack to only 24 bombers. The bombs dropped on the capital missed widely, more attacks followed, and more failures occurred. The B-29s, flying at 10,000 meters, were quickly burning through their fuel tanks due to strong headwinds, resulting in many of them crashing into the sea on the way home, unable to return to the islands with the precious fuel needed to bring their crews back alive. Even when winds were not as intense at lower altitudes, the newly discovered jet stream often blew at over 400 kilometers per hour, around 7,000 meters, diverting hundreds of bombs falling on Japan and carrying them harmlessly into the sea, where they racked up an impressive fish death toll, leaving any Japanese fisherman green with envy. Resources and lives were being wasted in high-altitude daylight raids. It became clear that something had to be done. That's when the general known as Iron Ass came into the picture. General Curtis LeMay officially took command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945 and was immediately given the responsibility of conducting the strategic air campaign against the Japanese islands. Initially, LeMay's results were painfully similar to those of his predecessor. LeMay realized the problem wasn't with the men's capabilities, but with the approach being used to do the job. High-altitude bombing strategies over Japan were no longer effective, given the winds and unpredictable weather. Facing the implied threat of a potential amphibious invasion of the Japanese islands, which could result in about 1 million American casualties, LeMay, also known as Iron Ass, opted to drastically change his tactics. He began using the Superfortress bombers to conduct extremely violent air raids on Japan. LeMay decided to abandon the tactics used in Europe and instructed his pilots to do the opposite of what they had been trained to do. Instead of conducting daytime raids from high altitudes, he ordered the B-29s to become nighttime raiders, flying at low altitude. His advisors convinced LeMay that Japan lacked significant low-altitude anti-aircraft defenses, and that enemy fighters would be less effective against bombers flying low in complete darkness at altitudes between 1,500 and 2,700 meters. Flying at low altitude would neutralize the jet stream and allow crews to direct their bombs more accurately toward targets, though pinpoint accuracy wasn't necessarily critical. The American heavy bombers favored the use of 220 and 450 kilogram high explosive bombs. These bombs had proven highly effective against the stone and concrete cities of Europe. However, when it came to Japanese cities, especially Tokyo, high explosive bombs were not as effective. Initially, small-scale incendiary attacks were carried out by LeMay's teams, with some success in cities like Nagoya and Kobe, which suffered from the fire raids. With the goal of neutralizing Japan's war-making capability, LeMay believed the best strategy was to burn its wooden cities to the ground. Thus, he ordered that Mission 38 continue with massive incendiary bombing raids to achieve this objective. For a firestorm to be as destructive as possible, at least one caused by man, it had to have the right conditions. The weather had to be dry, and it had to have been dry for some time. There had to be strong winds, and in the case of Tokyo, winds blowing from the north. Finally, the target's firefighting capability had to be limited. The imperial capital of Tokyo checked all those boxes on the night of March 9th to 10th. Tokyo was exceptionally dry for that time of year, with little rainfall recently, and the city's wooden structures were completely dry. The winds on the night of March 9th and the early hours of March 10th were strong. Gusts of more than 100 kilometers per hour were recorded in various parts of the city. Tokyo's firefighting capability was virtually non-existent given the size of the city. Only about 8,000 firefighters were assigned to the Tokyo area, and of those 8,000, only 1,000 were equipped with firefighting gear. Shockingly, the city had only 3 extension ladders for fighting fires. Moreover, there were no air raid shelters available in the city. To achieve his objective, LeMay selected a relatively small area in Tokyo, stretching 3 by 4 square kilometers, where about 750,000 people lived. American intelligence had correctly identified that this specific area of Tokyo housed a significant concentration of small factories, which made up the domestic production capacity of Japan's industry. With the target defined, the planes were loaded, and the crews properly briefed. Starting at 5:30 p.m. on March 9th, 1945, the first B-29 took off from North Field on Guam. Then, more than 280 other B-29s took off, leaving Guam, Saipan, and Tinian at 50-second intervals, all heading towards Tokyo. The mission, codenamed Operation Meeting House, was officially underway. Around 10:30 p.m., air raid sirens, insert siren sounds in the video, echoed across Tokyo. Although many of the inhabitants paid little attention, some citizens responded promptly, leaving their wooden homes, but many remained indifferent. While Tokyo had already been the target of bombings before, only once at night and by a smaller number of planes, this time was different. Observers on the Japanese coast heard the approach of the bomber formation around midnight, but were initially confused by the sound of so many aircraft flying so low. They hesitated to report the impending attack until 12:15 a.m., and unfortunately, by then it was already too late. The first B-29s to reach Tokyo were pathfinders, whose mission was to mark the target area for the next wave of bombers. These pathfinders approached the target from opposite directions and dropped their payloads, which spread across wooden rooftops and immediately triggered explosions and flames. With the pathfinders' work done, the operation continued. That night, the following B-29s dropped more than 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs over Tokyo. The napalm in those bombs consumed everything it touched. Each of the 279 B-29 bomb loads covered an area approximately 600 meters long by 91 meters wide. 1 hour after the first fires began, the conflagration spread beyond the target area, and the firestorm LeMay had so desired was achieved with devastating results. Citizens in that region ran through the streets in panic, desperate to find any form of safety from the searing heat. Temperatures reached an unbelievable 1,800 degrees Celsius in some places, depleting the oxygen in the air, suffocating those who weren't consumed by flames. People's clothing, even if not ignited directly by the bombs, literally caught fire from the sheer heat. Window glass began to liquefy, and the cyclonic winds of the firestorm launched this molten glass into the air, raining it down on people like a terrible storm. When people began to flee, their first instinct led them toward water. It was believed that water could ease the intense heat and protect those who took refuge in it from the flames now sweeping block after block of Tokyo. However, that night, water did not prove to be the salvation from fire. Futaba School was known for its large pool and brick buildings, so people crowded into the school, hoping to reach the pool or seek shelter inside its structures. By dawn, thousands of corpses were found at the school, not burned, but roasted to death by the heat. Those who had sought shelter in the pool were no luckier. More than 1,000 bodies were found in the pool, which had been full of water the night before, but was completely dry by morning. The B-29s flew over Tokyo for more than an hour, feeding the growing fire with more fuel. Japanese air defenses, as predicted, were scarce and ineffective. Some B-29s were caught in spotlights, while the terrified crews saw all available guns aimed at their bombers, but Japanese anti-aircraft gunners failed to inflict serious damage. The B-29s were simply too fast, too low, and too numerous to be stopped. Although air defenses didn't pose much of a threat to the B-29 bombers, the very bombs they dropped and the devastation caused by the firestorm created massive turbulence. The turbulence was so intense that bombers experienced sudden altitude changes of up to 300 meters, either up or down. In some cases, the winds flipped some B-29s upside down in the air, to the surprise of their crews. They only realized they were inverted when all the equipment inside the plane came crashing down on them, and the flames that were below were now above. When the bombers passed over the target area and opened the bomb bay doors to release their payloads, many crews were met with a repugnant stench. Maynard David, one of the bombardiers, recalled, "When the bomb bay doors opened, the plane filled with smoke from the ground, and we smelled something horrible. We closed the bomb bay doors as soon as we dropped the bombs and headed for the sea. The smell was still so strong inside the plane that the pilot ordered me to open the doors again to let fresh air in. You can imagine what was happening below us. The odor, of course, was the smell of burning human flesh. The casualties on the ground were so significant that the smell permeated the planes and the flight suits of the crews for days after the attack." After the Meeting House attack, Tokyo burned for days. Human corpses scattered across the streets seemed to be present in every corner of the target area. Piles of charred ash in the streets, at corners, and inside homes served as grim reminders that a human being had burned to death there. Mounds of bodies fused together, forming stacks over 2 meters high, a common sight throughout the region. The city river had dwindled to a trickle as piles of corpses floated downstream, clustering around bridges and blocking the flow like a horrific and grotesque dam. It would take weeks before Tokyo authorities could begin removing the dead and clearing the debris. Post-raid analysis revealed that Tokyo's capacity to produce war material, or any material, had been halved. 16 square kilometers of the once bustling capital were razed. More than 1 million people were left homeless after the attack, and over 250,000 buildings and homes were destroyed. Morale among the citizens of Tokyo plummeted. For the first time, many realized that the war was lost. Their government could feed them all the false propaganda it wanted, but the fiery writing was literally on the walls. The initial estimate of 110,000 deaths was all anyone needed to know to prove the point. American casualties were significantly lower, to say the least. About 90 airmen went missing after the attack, and 14 B-29s never returned due to enemy fire or accidents. General LeMay and his superior, General Hap Arnold, considered Operation Meeting House a great success. The mission to destroy Japan's cottage industry, at least in Tokyo, had been successfully completed. The positive impact of Meeting House was so significant that the firebombing of Japanese cities did not stop after March 9th and 10th. In the same week, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya again were attacked with incendiary bombs. The bloodshed would not relent anytime soon. Incendiary raids continued to devastate Japanese cities across the country. In total, the air raids on Japan, including incendiary, conventional, and later nuclear attacks, persisted until August 10, 1945. The sheer destruction and violence of the attacks achieved their goal. No amphibious invasion of Japan was necessary. Only after the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by nuclear weapons did Emperor Hirohito finally admit defeat. This happened only after hundreds of thousands of his subjects had been killed due to the air raids. According to a victorious U.S. report, over 50% of Tokyo's industry was located in residential and commercial areas. The incendiary bombing caused a 50% reduction in the city's total production. Eastern areas of Tokyo were especially affected, with about 1.2 million people living in the bombed districts. The devastation was immense, with 267,171 buildings destroyed, resulting in over 1 million people left homeless, as reported by the Tokyo police. Emperor Hirohito's visit to the destroyed areas of Tokyo in March 1945 marked the beginning of his personal involvement in the peace process, which culminated in Japan's surrender 6 months later. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later estimated that nearly 88,000 people died in the attack, 41,000 were injured, and over 1 million residents lost their homes. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated higher numbers: 97,000 dead and 125,000 wounded. After the war, Tokyo faced significant challenges in rebuilding. In 1945 and 1946, the city received a portion of the national reconstruction budget that roughly reflected the extent of the damage caused by the bombings, about 26.6%. However, in the following years, the share of resources allocated to Tokyo decreased considerably. By 1949, the city received only 10.9% of the budget, and during this period, the country also faced runaway inflation, which made money increasingly worthless. The occupation authorities, led by figures such as Joseph Dodge, took measures to drastically reduce the Japanese government's reconstruction programs. Instead of focusing on comprehensive recovery projects, they concentrated their efforts on improving roads and transportation. As a result, Tokyo did not experience rapid economic growth until the 1950s. In 2007, 112 members of the Association for the Bereaved Families of Victims of the Tokyo Air Raids filed a class action lawsuit against the Japanese government, demanding an apology and 1.232 billion yen in compensation. The lawsuit accused the Japanese government of inviting the attack by not ending the war earlier and then failing to help the civilian victims of the raids, while providing considerable support to former military personnel and their families. The plaintiff's case was dismissed in the first trial in December 2009, and their appeal was rejected. They then appealed to the Supreme Court, which dismissed the case in May 2013. In 2013, During the second term of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Abe's cabinet stated that the attacks were incompatible with humanitarianism, which is one of the foundations of international law, but also noted that it is difficult to argue whether the attacks were illegal under international law at the time. Today, the Tokyo Air Raid and War Damage Center is located well outside the city center and is much less known or visited than the Hiroshima Peace Memorial and Museum. In 2018, fewer than 10,000 people, including groups of school children, visited the Tokyo Center, compared to over 1.5 million people who visited the Hiroshima memorials that same year. When he was 12 years old, Katsumoto Saotome narrowly escaped the air raids over Tokyo. Today, at 87 years old, he remembers everything that happened with extraordinarily vivid clarity. Katsumoto Saotome said he understood that Hiroshima was unique for being the first place where nuclear bombs were used anywhere in the world. Tokyo was one of the many cities where incendiary bombs were dropped, he said. It wasn't anything new or unusual, because they were dropped everywhere. The atomic bombings also had more time to settle into the collective consciousness of post-war memories, as survivors began sharing their eyewitness accounts shortly after the war ended. The victims of the Tokyo bombings, on the other hand, did not tell their stories until long after the end of the war. People who are from a generation just a little older than mine, he said. Why did they stay silent? In 1971, he published the accounts of 7 survivors, in addition to his own, modeling his writing after John Hersey's famous report in The New Yorker on the immediate aftermath of the Hiroshima bombing. Saotome's book sold around 550,000 copies. Saotome, now retired from his position as a museum director, said he is not seeking an apology from the United States. He recalled that he once even befriended an American B-29 pilot who had visited Japan to identify the spot where he parachuted down. But when Saotome tried to show him a film that recreated the night of the bombing, the pilot hesitated. Maybe it was too vivid for him, Saotome said. It was dark below the planes. That footage was so real, and it really upset him. Saotome also said he could never forgive his own government for awarding Curtis LeMay, the architect of the Tokyo Air Raid, the Order of Merit, First Class, of the Grand Cordon of the Rising Sun, for helping establish Japan's modern air force after the war. That is totally unacceptable, he said. But Saotome is perhaps harsher on himself. Despite spending most of his adult life fighting to honor the memories of the survivors of the Tokyo bombing, he lamented that the public has not recognized the significance of what was lost or who suffered that night. He's worried he's running out of time. I don't know how many more years I can continue, he said, as other survivors pass away. To make people understand, we should have raised our voices much louder, he said. We should have tried so much harder, but it wasn't enough. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. God bless you all, and see you soon.